Hello interwebs, welcome to Let's Fix Computers. Today I'm going to be doing another firmware password removal video. Now I've done one of these before on how to remove this firmware password from a MacBook Air or a MacBook Pro for that matter. And this firmware password is activated either when you try and boot from another source or sometimes when you try and start the laptop full stop. Now, just to quickly address the elephant in the room, obviously circumventing passwords is always a dubious task to be doing. So needless to say, whenever I do this for customers, I have always verified that they are the legitimate owners of the laptop. There are numerous instances where there are perfectly legitimate reasons to need to do this. It could be that some kid has fiddled with the laptop and they've set a password. The customer may have just straight up forgotten their own password. That happens all the time. Or failing that, it might be a relative who has died, and they have died with a password-protected laptop full of family photos. So there are plenty of legitimate reasons why you might want to do this. With that in mind, I do always say to people, make sure you know who the legitimate owner of the laptop is, and when you're buying laptops, make sure you're buying from someone who's legit as well. Anyway, let's get to it. So one more thing that I want to point out as well, watch out in the comments section below. It will likely be flooded with bots saying, go to this person's Instagram, he hacked my laptop super fast and super cheap. They are all people trying to send you codes for things, and it's all a scam. Don't buy into it. I would be trying to delete them, but there's like 10 of them a day, and I've got better things to do than sit and delete comments. Anyway, right, let's turn this thing off. The first thing we need to do is remove the motherboard from this. And while I do that, I'll just tell you a couple of gotchas and things that I have learned since the previous video. So, number one, we do need to remove the logic board. We need to desolder the firmware chip from this and reprogram it. I'm going to use a serial programmer for that, which I'll tell you more about in a moment. I also need a screwdriver. Now, there are different levels of firmware password on MacBooks. I don't know fully what the terminology for them is because that's going to vary. However, the previous video I did was a very basic form of the firmware password, and that was literally just UEFI level only. And so I was able to drop in a replacement BIOS chip, and that just cleared the board. Job done. However, I have also done this on another laptop recently, and I went into a world of hurt where it was an iCloud lock. And on that one, you have to clear the password and you must reinstall macOS. It's not optional. You must reinstall macOS. I jumped through lots of hoops to try and save a macOS install for someone. It was a world of hurt, and suffice to say, we're ending up reinstalling macOS anyway. So yeah, make of that what you will. There is also, I believe, a sort of a quote-unquote a top level of this where I think it might be unbypassable. However, I'm not sure. So suffice to say, do watch out and do not assume that this can be done in all circumstances. If you're doing repairs, make sure that the customer is aware that there is not a 100% success rate on this. So I've just opened up this one, and we've got a third-party SSD with a lot of sticky gunk on it. Oh well. In any case, in any case, let's break this guy open and get the logic board out. So I'll quickly zip through this section. And out she comes. There we go. Right, so on the back of the logic board we find the firmware chip, or the BIOS chip. BIOS is technically the wrong word for it these days because it's UEFI. BIOS is obsolete. However, BIOS chip, UEFI chip, firmware, whatever you want to call it. Let's take a closer look. So here we have an MXIC MX25L6473E. So this is the chip that we need to modify the programming of. Now, you can buy pre-programmed ones of these on eBay, and you could just desolder this one and put a new one on, which is actually what I did for the previous video. And this has pros and cons. The advantage is it's fairly easy, and technically it means you could do this job without requiring a programmer. However, if you do that, you're not going to have the correct serial number saved on the laptop. And on the previous one I did, this never seems to be a problem. I didn't have any issues with that laptop at all. But people in the comments did point out, that's not got the right serial number in it. And they're absolutely right. So we're going to program this in a slightly different way. So we're going to dump the firmware from this chip, modify that, and then program it back onto the chip again to make sure that we preserve the serial number and things like that. So firstly, let's remove this from the board. I'm going to use my hot air station for this, and I'm going to add a little bit of flux just to help ease things along. There we go. And let's go. Just do a little bit of preheating from a distance. I'm running my hot air station at maximum air, maximum heat, so that's 450 degrees C. And just heat the board up a little bit from a distance just to take the chill off of the board. And now let's go in and heat for reals. And off it comes. Easy peasy. So make a note of the orientation just for your ease. We had the text the correct way up, and you'll see that little slot off in the top left. That indicates pin 1. So pin 1 is in the top left of the chip when the writing is the correct way up. So I'll just put that chip to one side one moment. Now, in order to program my chip, I'm going to put it onto this little breakout board. And that's going to adapt this down to a pin header, which I can drop into my programmer nice and easily. So let's just put that in shot. And this thing is already covered in solder and flux and stuff, so I don't need to add anything more to it. And I'm going to turn the airflow on my hot air station way down, and I'm going to drop the temperature a little bit as well, because this is a small breakout board. We don't need a sledgehammer for this. When you're working on a motherboard, you need a sledgehammer. However, when you're working on a tiny little breakout board, you do not. That should do it. It's not perfectly straight, but we're on a breakout board. Who cares? Now, the programmer that I'm going to use is very good at telling you when you have a bad connection to the chip, and it'll tell you which pin is not connected properly. However, not all the programmers can do that, so sometimes just checking your connections might just help avoid you from getting punked by your programmer when you think it's not working properly and it actually turns out you're not soldered in properly. And the program I'm going to be using today is my RT809F serial programmer, which is my current favorite one. I like this programmer quite a lot. I get on very well with this one. There are lots of other programmers out there that you could use, including the TL8662, the EZP 2019 or EZP 2020 or something like that. And also another very popular one is this guy here, which is a CH341A. Now, this guy is one of my favorites at the moment. This programmer is really cheap. It's like £5 or $10 or something like that. So this is a really cheap programmer to get hold of. However, this has a big disadvantage in that it puts 5 volts into the chips you're programming. Now, most of the time they'll probably tank that. However, that's incredibly bad practice to do that in any kind of volume. There are modifications you can do to fix this, and I'm actually going to make a video on that soon. Or you can check out YouTube for existing videos, because I really want to be able to recommend this guy because it's such a cheap and readily available programmer. However, that voltage mod, that's mission critical. You've got to do that, otherwise at some point you're going to melt someone's BIOS chip. Not a great look. I really wanted to make this video a demo video for this particular programmer, but I'm not going to show this guy until I've volt modded it, because I know that people are going to be in the comments going, oh, you can't use that, it puts 5 volts into the chip. So yeah, that one's for next time. Today we're using the 809F. So as aforementioned, this is an MX25L6473. And is that an E? Yes, 73E. There we go. And let's do a read. And we'll just save that file as the name of the chip and locked. So we know that that is the raw dump that we haven't touched. So now to edit our firmware file, we'll first open the dump. So let's open that up. And I'm going to search for $SVS. So we'll search that, and that brings us to this section here, which is at 005-92050. And what I'm going to do is select that whole section, all of this here, from the Fs back to the Fs. So all of that down to here. And so we've got null data below it, and we've got null data above it. And we're going to do file fill selection. There we go, that's more like it. And I'm going to fill all of that with FF, which is just null data, nothing, 0. So as you can see, that's all gone red to indicate that's a change we're making. And so now I'll save this, save as, and we shall save it as the file name and unlocked. Bam. There we go. So now we have an unlocked version of this file. So I'll minimize that, go back to my programmer, and I will open our modified file. So I'll open unlocked. So now we've loaded from there. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the right, and that is going to erase the chip, and then it's going to write our new file to it, and then we'll have a reprogrammed firmware chip. There we go, looks like we're done, and that has done a verification as well, so I know that the write was absolutely successful. And I'm now ready to pop this guy out the reader. And now we'll desolder this from my breakout board and put it back onto the logic board. That's not the straightest in the world. However, in my experience, better to quit while you're ahead. It's certainly on the board. And we'll put this guy back in. Okay, connector check. Everything has something going into it, and I don't have anything left on the bench. Battery back in. Now, when we turn it on, I need to do a very specific sequence with this. We do not want it to boot into macOS, because if it has an iCloud lock on it, then iCloud will go, hey, there's supposed to be a firmware password on this, and it will set a firmware password again, and we'll be back to square one. So what we have to do is we have to immediately clear the PRAM or the NVRAM, whatever it is, and then we have to reinstall macOS. So I'm going to turn on the laptop, clear the PRAM with Command Option R and P, and then I'm going to hold down Option to get the boot menu, and then I can boot from a macOS flash drive. So here we go. So power on, Command Option PR, and I'm going to wait for 2 chimes. There's 1. There's 2. And holding down Option. And now we're waiting for the boot menu. There we go. And there's our boot menu. So we're now past the firmware password, and we're now ready to reinstall macOS on this. Now, the reason why I waited for 2 chimes is just 1 power cycle is technically all you need. However, if the laptop was muted the previous time it was turned off, it won't chime. So the first time you do the power cycle, it may not have chimed. It probably did start, but you won't have heard it because it might have been muted, etc., etc. So it's much safer to just wait for 2 chimes. We might have done the PRAM reset twice then. However, that doesn't matter. But if we've waited for 2 chimes, we know that it is absolutely taken under all circumstances. So that's why I waited that long, just to make sure we get it first time. Right, I'm going to grab a macOS flash drive. Plug in my Big Sur flash drive. And I'm going to select Install macOS Big Sur. Go! Watch this be too old for Big Sur. Right, and I've plugged in my, I've got an mSATA SSD here that has multiple versions of macOS on it. So I would recommend going in with Catalina or older. Big Sur was the point where Apple started getting real heavy about wanting iCloud logins, whereas Catalina and older are a bit more forgiving, so you're less likely to run into trouble with these. It shouldn't be looking for old data. So we'll boot for that, and we should just get the option to just go straight into disk utility, where I can then nuke the SSD on this. So unfortunately, we do have to erase the SSD. Otherwise, at some point, there is a solid chance that the old install of macOS will phone home, and the macOS servers will turn around and go, hey, that's supposed to have a firmware password on it, and it'll lock it back up again. So we do need to make sure we erase the SSD to ensure that that doesn't happen. Catalina tends to be a bit more forgiving with this. Big Sur will look at the existing SSD and try and uncut and say, oh, we've got user data here, and try and provide recovery options for that user data. Now, we don't want that to happen. So we want to make sure that we go in with an older version of macOS to prevent that. After that, you can go ahead and upgrade to Big Sur. Alternatively, given that we've got an M.2 SSD in this, you could of course just pull the SSD and erase it from another computer. That would also work. So I'm going to say English UK. And also, this step might not be necessary depending on the level of firmware password that is on the computer. However, my strong advice is not to risk it and just nuke the SSD. I have tried messing around to avoid this, and it's not worth the hassle. I can tell you that much. So I'm going to select View All Devices, so we can select the very top level SSD and just hit Erase. And I'm just going to call that macOS. Erase. There we go. And now we can quit disk utility and install macOS. Right, and I shouldn't need to guide you through the rest of the installation of macOS. Hit continue a lot of times. and one update to Big Sur later, and this thing is now fully up to date as well. So past that, we're all finished with this. Thank you very much for watching. As always, my support links are down in the description below for my Twitter, Patreon, Discord and Instagram and all of that stuff. Or stick around for the end card, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you very much and goodbye.